The Enchanted Night. A love bound by magic. The forest loomed ahead, shrouded in mist as the night's chill clung to the air. Darius pushed forward, each step growing heavier as his strength faded. His armor clinked softly with every labored breath, and his hand pressed tightly against his side where the blood had long since soaked through his tunic. Darkness surrounded him, but somewhere within the thick canopy of trees, he could sense something darker still, an unseen force that had been chasing him for hours. His vision blurred and he stumbled, his boots sinking into the damp earth. His heartbeat pounded in his ears and he knew he was close to collapse. But then, as if by some miracle, he spotted a faint glow through the trees. A soft, warm light beckoned him, promising shelter, promising safety. He forced himself onward, driven by a primal instinct to survive. As the light grew closer, he could make out the shape of a small cottage nestled deep within the woods. But before he could reach it, his strength finally gave out. He fell forward, the weight of his armor pulling him down into the earth. His world went black. Elara, the young Enchantress, was tending to her herbs beneath the silver glow of the moon. Her hands moved deftly, crushing leaves and mixing potions with practiced ease. She had lived in isolation for years, ever since the kingdom had outlawed magic, and she had grown accustomed to the stillness of the forest. But tonight, there was something different in the air, a disturbance, a shift. The sound of armor clattering against stone reached her ears and she froze. Her heart quickened and she turned toward the sound, her eyes narrowing. There, at the edge of the clearing, lay a man, a knight by the look of his bloodied armor. For a moment, she hesitated. A knight? He was likely one of the king's soldiers, sworn to hunt down people like her. She should have left him where he fell, but something about the way he lay there, broken and vulnerable, tugged at her. She moved cautiously toward him, her hand raised as if to shield herself, though her magic would offer her no protection against the emotions stirring within her. She knelt beside him, examining the deep wound that cut across his side. Blood stained his armor, but there was something unnatural about the injury. It pulsed with a darkness she recognized all too well. "Dark magic," she whispered under her breath, her brow furrowing in concern. This was no ordinary wound. Whoever had done this intended for him to die slowly, painfully. But why would someone curse a knight? Her hand hovered over his wound, her fingers trembling as she debated what to do. He was a knight, sworn to the king. If he discovered her identity, he could betray her. And yet, she couldn't just let him die. With a deep breath, she whispered an incantation under her breath, and her hand began to glow with a soft golden light. The magic flowed from her, enveloping the knight in its warmth, and she felt his body respond as his wound slowly began to heal. "By the light of the moon," she murmured, her voice low and soothing. "By the breath of the earth, let the shadows that cling to you fade. Let your heart beat strong once more." The golden light danced across his skin, knitting the torn flesh together, sealing the wound as if it had never been. His breathing steadied, and the lines of pain that had marred his face began to soften. Elara watched him in silence for a moment longer, her heart still racing. Who was he? And what had brought him to her door, cursed and near death? Darius stirred, his eyelids fluttering open as consciousness slowly returned to him. The first thing he saw, was a woman kneeling beside him, her face half hidden by the shadows, but her blue eyes glowing softly in the moonlight. His mind was foggy, and he struggled to make sense of where he was, how he had ended up here. Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough and weak. The woman stood abruptly, turning her back to him as she moved toward the table of herbs. Her movements were graceful, but there was an air of wariness about her. "You shouldn't move," she said, her voice calm but distant. "Your wound was deep. You need to rest." Darius blinked, his memory still fragmented. He pushed himself up, wincing at the pain that shot through his body, and looked down at his side. The wound. It was gone. Only faint traces of blood remained, but the jagged tear in his flesh had vanished. His eyes darted back to the woman, realization dawning on him. "You healed me," he said, disbelief lacing his words. She said nothing, her back still turned to him as she busied herself with her herbs. Darius's mind raced. The wound had been cursed. He had felt the darkness spreading through his body. There was no way ordinary healing could have saved him. His eyes narrowed, suspicion creeping into his thoughts. "You used magic?" Elara froze for a moment, then slowly turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Magic is not what you think it is, knight," she said, her tone sharp. "It is not the evil your king claims it to be." Darius managed to sit up fully, though his muscles still ached from the ordeal. His hand instinctively went to where his sword should have been, but he found it missing. He stared at her, unsure whether he should be grateful or fearful. "The king forbids magic. It's dangerous," he said, his voice low. Elara's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Your king forbids what he does not understand. Magic flows through the veins of this world, just as it flows through mine." She stepped closer, her eyes locking with his. "And tonight, it saved your life." Darius looked at her in silence, the weight of her words settling in. He had been trained to see magic as a threat, something to be feared, hunted. But this woman, this enchantress, had saved him. The darkness that had nearly consumed him was gone, thanks to her. He lowered his head, confusion swirling within him. "Why did you help me?" Elara paused, her gaze softening just slightly. "Because..." She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "Because you are part of something far greater than you realize. You were attacked by dark magic for a reason. There is a curse that has begun to stir in this kingdom, and you are at the center of it." Darius frowned, shaking his head. "What are you talking about?" Elara stepped back, turning away from him as she gathered her herbs. "I have seen it in my visions," she said quietly. "The ancient curse that has long been dormant is awakening. It is tied to you, and to me." Darius stared at her, disbelief flooding his mind. "That's impossible." Elara glanced at him over her shoulder, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. "No, it's not. The dark magic that wounded you was only the beginning. If we don't act soon, the kingdom will fall. You and I, we are bound by fate. Together, we must stop it." Silence fell between them, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Darius didn't know whether to believe her, but deep inside something told him that she was right. There was a connection between them, a force greater than either of them could explain. Finally, Darius spoke, his voice quiet but firm. If what you say is true, then what must we do? Elara turned to him fully, her expression softening. We must trust each other, she said, her voice gentle but resolute. And we must prepare for the battle ahead. The curse will not wait for us. It is coming, and we are the only ones who can stop it. Darius nodded slowly, the reality of his new fate sinking in. He didn't fully understand the magic that bound them, but one thing was certain: his life and the kingdom depended on what they did next. Together,